Have you noticed who's really winning the global growth race lately? Turns out, companies from emerging markets are expanding at a pace that is just, well, it's incredible. So in this explainer, we're going to break down why that is. And a little spoiler alert, it's probably not for the reason you think. Okay, let's get into it.
So this is the big question we're tackling. We're not talking about a tiny edge here. The source material is showing that companies based in emerging markets are growing about twice as fast as companies from developed economies. So what on earth is their secret?
And, it gets even crazier when they go head-to-head on neutral ground. So in countries where neither company has a home field advantage. In those situations, the emerging challengers are growing a whopping 2.5 times faster. I mean, that is a massive advantage. So what's driving?
Okay, so the most common explanation you'll hear is actually pretty simple. It's kind of our first clue in this whole mystery. And it all boils down to size.
The theory goes something like this. Of course they're growing faster. They're smaller, right? It's way easier to double your revenue when you're starting from, say, $1 million versus $1 billion. It makes perfect sense on the surface.
And yeah, the research shows there's definitely some truth to this. The average emerging market company in the study was pulling in about $3 billion in revenue, while their developed market counterparts averaged $8 billion. So yeah, they are, on average, less than half the size. Case closed, right? Well, not so fast.
See, this is where that simple theory starts to fall apart. When the researchers really dug into the numbers, they found that of the total 13.2% growth gap, size only accounts for about 3.4 percentage points. That's just a quarter of the total advantage.
Which means there is a huge piece of this puzzle still missing. We've just figured out that the most obvious answer is only a tiny part of the real story. There are much deeper, more strategic things going on here. And this is where it gets really interesting.
So it turns out, the real story isn't about size at all. According to the source material, this incredible outperformance really comes down to a powerful mix of 3 key strategic choices. 3, you could say, secret ingredients that are rewriting the rules of business.
The researchers basically found that the answer lies in these 3 key areas. You've got the plus sign, that stands for aggressive reinvestment back into the company. Then there's the infinity loop, which symbolizes this incredible agility in how they move their resources around. And the target, well, that represents a laser focus on very specific high-growth business models.
All right, so let's dig into each of these, one by one, and see exactly how these companies are building this incredible growth advantage.
First up, aggressive reinvestment. To put it simply, these emerging market companies are making a huge bet on their own future. Instead of giving profits back to shareholders as dividends, they're plowing that cash straight back into the business to fuel even more growth.
And wow, the numbers really tell the story here. Look at this. Developed economy companies paid out almost 80% of their earnings as dividends. The emerging challengers, just 39%. And where did all that extra cash go? Straight into fixed assets, which grew at 12% a year, way faster than their developed world peers.
The source material gives us a great example. South Africa's MTN. They use this exact strategy to fund a huge expansion of their internet and cell services all across Africa and the Middle East. They were pouring billions into new networks. They weren't just growing for today, they were building the very foundation for tomorrow's growth.
Okay, so the second secret ingredient is agility. And it's not just about spending more money, it's about being incredibly quick and decisive about where that money goes. These companies are absolute masters at pulling capital out of slow areas and pushing it into new, high-growth opportunities.
Just take a look at India's Kesoram Industries. Over 7 years, they shifted 80% of their capital between their different business units. They saw the auto industry in India was about to boom, so they pivoted hard. They moved most of their new investments out of cement and into the tire business. That's not a small tweak, that's a radical bet on growth.
And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. Focus. These companies have built their entire businesses around serving the specific needs of the exploding middle classes in emerging economies. And they do this by creating lower-cost products that deliver exactly what these new consumers want and, importantly, what they can afford.
Now, you might hear lower cost and think, oh, so less innovative. But the data shows that's just flat out wrong. I mean, sure, developed companies still file more patents overall, but just look at the growth rate. Emerging companies ramped up their patent filings by 22% a year over a decade. Compare that to just 5% for their rivals. They are closing that innovation gap, and they're closing it fast.
And Huawei is the perfect example of this. Between 2008 and 2010, they were one of the top 5 patent filers in the entire world. And get this, a staggering 46% of their whole workforce is in R&D. Think about that. Nearly half their company is dedicated to research and development. That's a massive strategic bet on creating the future.
So, what does all of this add up to? Well, these three strategies, reinvestment, agility, and focus, they aren't just one-off tactics. They really represent a powerful new playbook for how to win in today's global economy.
So here it is, the Challenger's playbook in a nutshell. 1. Bet on yourself with aggressive reinvestment. 2. Stay nimble and move your money to where the opportunities are. And 3. Build your whole business around the fastest growing parts of the world. It really is a formula for outperformance.
So why should the established giants care about this? Because it's a direct challenge to how they operate. To compete, they have to figure out how to overcome their own internal slowness, how to make tough cuts in their slower home markets, and convince everyone to shift people and money to where the growth actually is.
And it really leaves us with a final question to think about. When you look at the strategy for growth in your own world, you have to ask, is the mindset more like a hungry, nimble challenger, or more like a comfortable, established giant? Because the answer to that question could very well decide who wins the next decade.